like to thank all of you for this opportunity to interact with you all, and would like to thank NIT Surathkal, Mahe, and also CII Mangaluru for organizing this event. So I will share my presentation. I have a short presentation. So I will take about 30 to 40 minutes to tell you about what I believe about the research and technology entrepreneurship kind of activities, and I will also address the issues that Mr. Jeevan Saldana has mentioned about patenting and what to patent, how to patent, where to patent. I think some of these are indeed questions that many people have in their minds, and I will also address it towards the end. So I think one of the biggest challenges that we face in this country is we have in a way categorized engineering as about electrical, mechanical, civil, etc. This fragmented way of doing engineering is coming in the way of any of us becoming effective as technology leaders, or as somebody to provide solutions to the society and all of that. I think to me engineering is all about finding optimal and sustainable solutions to society's current and future problems. I think engineering is all about finding solutions to problems. And these solutions need to be optimal, and they also need to be sustainable. I think the environmental concerns are growing stronger and stronger by the day. So therefore, we need to worry about how our technologies will impact the environment, impact the social lives and other aspects too. That is where the humanities, the other departments also become very important for engineering right now. Having said that, if you look at India, India is actually doing very well in research. India is currently ranked third in the world according to the National Science Foundation USA data. India has reached the third position. We are behind China and US. China share of research at the world level is 20%. US is about 16%. Compared to them, we are just about 5%. So I think, but we are still at the third position and way behind these two countries. But we are not spending enough money. But though we are the fastest growing country right now, India is growing at almost 11% in scientific publications as compared to the world average of 4%. And we are still not spending enough money in terms of the percentage GDP. Our expenditure on higher education is stagnant, at 0.6 to 0.7% of GDP, whereas the developed nations are spending anywhere from 2% to 4% of GDP. For example, South Korea, Israel, which we see as great, technology superpowers, or US or China, all of them are spending anywhere from 2% to 4%. So India is stuck at that 0.6 to 0.7%. And the new education policy also talks about a percentage of GDP which is much higher for the education. Let us hope the NEP will be implemented and some of this will change in the country too. And in certain areas like nanotechnology, while overall we have reached a third position only about a year ago, but in the areas of nanotechnology, we have been at the third position for almost like a decade now. India started the nano mission way back in 2002, 2003, and after about a decade of the nano mission activity, 2013, 2014 onwards, we have been at the third position in the world as far as the nanotechnology is concerned. This is one of my areas of interest. But the biggest challenge is while we have become experts at getting funds and converting that into knowledge, I think that part we are able to do very well. That is all measured in terms of publications. But our ability to convert that knowledge back into wealth is where we are severely lacking. And that is where we all need to, whether it is Manipal Institute or NIT Surathkal or IITs, all of us need to now start looking at how do we convert that knowledge back into wealth. Because if we don't do that, I think that one way sort of expenditure is not going to be liked by anyone. And at some point or the other, people will ask us the question that you all seem to be doing great research, publishing papers. These papers are also getting cited, but in what way the common man has benefited? In what way is it helping the society, the nation, and Atmanirbhar Bharat, and all of these sort of things? So therefore, that question we all need to answer at some point in time. And as educationists, as researchers, as administrators, I think we all need to see, what all we need to do at the institutional level, at the individual level, at the faculty level, what are the things that we need to look at in order to achieve this? Because if we all don't collectively work together, I don't see much of a future. I think getting money and writing papers, as a one-way sort of a thing is not going to take us anywhere. And we are so bad in this even now because, just think of the Raman's effect, the C.V. Raman, for which India is known. The Raman effect is equivalent to maybe 10 other Nobel Prizes when it comes to the impact the Raman effect has caused. Is there a single company in this country which is making Raman instruments? We import, all of us import, Raman instruments from all over the world, and not a single company has been able to, achieve any kind of leadership when it comes to even selling the Raman instruments. And that is a kind of a situation even now. And even today, if we have developed a technology like that, there's still challenges in taking it to the market. And essentially what is happening is we are developing the knowledge. Somebody is converting that knowledge back into technology or products and sell it back to India. So therefore, we tend to be importers of every technology, while a lot of knowledge is actually getting generated in our academic institutions. So this is where I believe we have to do things differently. There are problems and there are solutions. And in academic institutions, in industries, our job is to find solutions. And there are problems in the society. Just look around you, you find so many problems, whether it is agriculture, environment, or manufacturing. Everywhere there are problems. The biggest challenge is to match them, the problems, looking for a solution. And there are all these problems that we need to do. And whereas in academia, we are developing solutions, or we seem to be developing solutions, or we seem to convey the impression that we are working on solutions, but all these solutions often are looking for a problem. So you have a solution, but now you are trying to figure out, I have found out this, where can I apply it? That is how most of our research solutions look like from academia. While there are problems looking for a solution, and what we are actually doing is developing solutions which are looking for a problem. So that matchmaking is completely missing, and we need to find that perfect fit. I think what we need to do is understand the societal problems and convert those problems to projects. I think that is a fundamental thing that we need to do. Unless we convert these problems into projects, unless we put our resources into finding those solutions, I think that matchmaking is not going to happen. And this is where certain things need to change. I will also tell you what we have done at IIT Delhi. I have been spending almost like 5 years now here, over 5 years in fact. So I will tell you, I'm not just preaching, for the sake of saying all this. At my individual level, at the institution level, I will tell you what we have done and how it has impacted the way we have been functioning. When I look at any educational institution, whether it is Manipal or NIT Surathkal or IIT Delhi, or for that matter any institution, we have three aspects to our to what we do in the educational institutions. One is education itself, where we have knowledge available, and we disseminate that knowledge to the students through the classroom teaching and all of that. And education wise, I think India does produce good quality graduates. I don't really believe in all these the rankings or employability rankings and all of that. At least our good institutions produce world class graduates. I think if somebody comes and says you are ranked so and so in the employability, I think these are all who you ask, and these are all perception based rankings. The reality is completely different. So on the education side, I would like to believe that our top institutions are as good as any institution in the world, and we have also adapted to the online mode of teaching, learning very effectively. I mean, as good as what it can be given all the constraints. So education part of it, while there is no there is no limit to excellence. If you want to be becoming better, you can always become better, because there is nothing like you reach this level and then you have achieved that excellence kind of a thing. Whether it is research or education, you are always trying to improve things, and we are constantly improving and getting better at it. The second aspect is knowledge generation, which is where the publications come. That is where we measure the knowledge generation through research publications. And even there, like I told you already, we seem to be doing very well. India is ranked, third, as I said, in terms of research publications, despite very low spending per dollar spent. India is publishing more papers than any other country in the world. Even compared to China, we are way ahead of China when it comes to per dollar spent, how many publications Indians write. And even if you look at the citations, we are not doing all that bad. How many people are citing our papers? Even there, we are among the top 10 countries, kind of thing. So knowledge generation also is happening, but again, we can do better. We can write more nature papers. We can write more science papers. I think, but that will also require investments. Very often, to publish papers in those journals, I think access to good facilities is also very important. Since we haven't invested enough in these high-end facilities, very often the research is a poor man's way of finding something. I mean, you want to find something, but then that critical piece of equipment, which is expensive, is missing. And most of our research always is, because that is missing, can I now achieve the same goal or objective by using some low-cost way, some what do you call it, frugal way of achieving that solution. So most of our research is often bypassing that equipment requirement, which is not available, and then publish a paper despite that. So I think, but once we start investing more and more into creation of these high-end facilities, I think we will also be able to publish more nature and science kind of papers. So I'm not too much worried about all of this. And my biggest concern is the innovation. Innovation is essentially converting that knowledge to wealth. That part is something which is totally lacking. And that part is something where we have a long way to go, as compared to many of these advanced kind of nations. How do we do that? How can knowledge become innovation? How can wealth gets created out of the knowledge we generate? I always say that, while we talk about R&D as research and development, I would define R&D as relevance and delivery. If our research becomes relevant to the societal problems, where, like I said, the problems to projects kind of a thing, and when that happens, and when you find good delivery mechanisms, to take them to the society, that is when innovation will thrive. And that part is missing. Either we don't have the relevance, or we don't have while even if you have developed a good technology, we haven't figured out how to take it to the market, how to get it to the people. I think these are the two aspects where our educational institutions are severely lacking right now, and this is where we need to do things a little bit differently. And I will also tell you, how we have tried to do that at IIT Delhi in the last 5.5 years, kind of thing. And so then, having said that, one of the ways to bring relevance, in my opinion, is how do you choose research problems in academia? That is the fundamental thing that needs to change in this country. I have worked at multiple places. For example, when I was in the US, very almost every week, somebody from the industry used to come to me or come to our group and say that, I have this problem, can you solve it? And then the professor will say, but that's fine, it's a good problem, we will solve, but I need this support, that support, and industry would fund a project to solve the problem, and the faculty member will develop a solution, industry will benefit from it, and then you go ahead with the entire thing. And that is how the problems were getting generated in much of the academia. In India, if you look at the way we pick up problems, of how our research scholars identify problems, it all starts with library. I think whenever a student joins us, the first thing we tell the student is go to library and do a literature review. All our PhD thesis start with literature review, and then when a student comes, the student reads 100 papers, looks at, sir, this is done, but this particular parameter is not studied with respect to this. So then you are essentially trying to fill that gap, and then you, whatever is missing in those 100 papers, you try to fill it up, and then you write another paper, and then that is how the research actually happens. So 70 to 100% of problems, depending on which institute you go to, all the problems originate in library. And a problem that originates in library often ends up in a library. It doesn't even see the light of the day. I think this is the biggest challenge that we are facing. So how do we move away from this, library-based kind of research to something which is more society-based? Can we, for example, find a problem from the society? Now, how do I find the problem from the society? As an engineer, I have never even gone out of my lab, and I have never even interacted with the stakeholders in the society. I have always been in academia. I've never even worked in the industry. How do I pick up problems from the society? So that, I think that is where, as administrators, we need to create avenues for our faculty and students. I call them the immersion programs. So if you can, get immersion programs, if your students and faculty spend time, in the summers, for example, if your students go to a hospital and spend time with the medical doctors. Just see how is medical practice done. What are the kinds of issues the doctors face on a day-to-day kind of a basis. We run a very successful biodesign program with All India Institute of Medical Sciences in Delhi. And we also have now almost like 100 new projects initiated with the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, AIIMS Delhi. That is because, if you want to work in the medical related technologies, you need to work with the doctors and find out what do they have, for their day-to-day kind of a requirements, and what is that they don't have. And once you start interacting with them, you can find a lot of interesting problems. Similarly, the problems of farmers. We created a rural internship program at IIT Delhi. Now, if a student says, I want to spend time in a rural area, IIT Delhi facilitates the interaction, the stay in the village, interactions with the farmers and all the local kind of stakeholders. So the student now spends time in the village for a couple of months and then understands what are the issues in the farming sector, come back and then try to find some more solutions. We started a program called GRIP at IIT Delhi. GRIP stands for Grassroots Innovation Program, because in our institutions, we get students from all over the country, from remotest parts of the country. So what we are telling students is, you identify a problem which has relevance in your local area. Now, you might have come from Northeast, some small town there, and you identify a problem in that local area, and you use our institutions, resources to find a solution to that problem. And then, once you find a solution, you can start a company, you can do whatever that it takes in order to take that to the society. So under the GRIP initiative, we are now asking students to identify problems concerning the places they come from and form groups of people from within that region and use the IIT resources. IIT funds all of these projects. IIT provides the faculty mentorship, and then you find solutions to those problems and take them back and implement it in your rural area, because you are connected to your native place. We don't want people in that region to say that, oh, our child has gone to this institute, that institute. That is a matter of pride for all of them. But if they can also say that our child has not only gone there, but also using having gone there has solved a problem in our village, I think that is what we want to hear more and more. So we started this GRIP initiative, which is now getting implemented. And similarly, the humanities and social sciences departments need to play a much bigger role, because so far we have seen them as supporting departments, and because they have to offer some courses in the curriculum. But at IIT Delhi, we have significantly strengthened our humanities department, because they are our window to the society. They are the people who are supposed to be connected with the society issues, and they are the ones who can explain the problems to engineers and scientists, so that we can try to find the solutions to those problems, whether it is farmers problem, whether it is the environmental concerns, whether it's any other thing. There are humanities faculty members who are doing research in those areas on nutrition, on multiple things. Connecting them with the engineering faculty is again very important to find those problems. So we started a kind of a grand challenge initiative at IIT Delhi, which is led by the humanities department. They identify a problem, they work with the remaining engineering departments, and then they submit a proposal to the institute, and we fund that research. So that is a grand challenge initiative we recently funded in the humanities department, because a humanities department in an engineering institute needs to be very different from a humanities department in JNU, for example. So JNU being a liberal arts or social sciences kind of an institute, the humanities departments there, must have a different flavor as compared to a humanities department sitting, in the midst of all these engineering kind of departments. And that change we are trying to bring about in humanities, and I see a great role for humanities departments in identifying the problems. The third thing is, of course, from the industry. Can we pick up problems from the industry? That is where academia industry collaborations are very useful. And very often I tell industries, you don't even need to fund large projects or anything, set up huge facilities. That is the job of the government often, to set up those large facilities. You give us the right set of problems, and you help us support the PhD students. That way, through PhD students, if you are connected with the institute, and if these students are working on problems relevant to you, you can observe the student over a period of time. And if the student, does well, you can even recruit the student after the graduation. And in the process, we also find solutions to some of your kind of issues. So I think PhD students need to become the bridges between the faculty and the industries. And I think I would like to see more and more PhD projects supported by the industries, and even Government of India has done pretty well in that area. In fact, there is a program called Prime Minister's Fellowship Scheme. That is not the standard PMRF that I am talking about. There is a Prime Minister's Fellowship Scheme. You can go to the CIA website or FICCI website and search Prime Minister's Fellowship Scheme. Under that scheme, a PhD student can be co-funded by the industry. Half the scholarship comes from government, Department of Science and Technology, in addition to 2 lakhs per year as contingency. Only half of the stipend is supposed to come from the industry, which is a very small fraction of the total money. And because government is putting in a lot of money, but in the process, the PhD student will be called Prime Minister's Research Fellow, and then industry gets to define the project. Industry person gets to be a co-supervisor for the student, and that scheme is, at least 1,000 fellowships have been sanctioned. We have not been able to fill up those positions. Just about 150 positions have been filled up, and there are at least 700 to 800 more students, can be hired under that scheme. That is something, which has not been very successful. So I think we need to have more such fellowship kind of programs. And even the professors of practice at IIT Delhi, we made a change in our faculty recruitment process. We said that industry professionals with deep knowledge in a particular area can become professors at IIT Delhi. They will be called professors of practice, and they can, seek employment in our institutions. Further, they don't even need a PhD. And we are saying that at IIT Delhi, 10% of our faculty can be professors of practice. We even without a PhD, with some deep knowledge, having worked in an industry, is all that is sufficient to be called a faculty member at IIT Delhi. And we have started recruiting now quite a few people now, good people from industries as professors of practice, and they are connecting the faculty, the departments to the industry sectors that they come from, which has been pretty popular, pretty successful at IIT Delhi. Now we are also industry setting up centers of excellence. Now CSR funding can be used to support research, which is a major change that the Government of India has done under the CSR rules. So many industries can set up centers of excellence now in IITs using their CSR grants, and industry sabbaticals for faculty and for industry people to come and spend time. This is the Prime Minister's Fellowship Scheme that I talked about, which is operated by CIA and FICCI. And we also launched a very interesting initiative called FIRE at IIT Delhi. FIRE stands for Faculty Innovation and Research-Driven Entrepreneurship. That is to convert researchers into entrepreneurs. And there we have a specific scheme called FIRE, where if a faculty member at IIT Delhi says that I want to become an entrepreneur, institute provides that person 50 lakh rupees as a grant. All of it is equity funding, and then provides that funding for building prototypes and all of that, and gives leave, 1 year of sabbatical, 2 years of lean, which is approved by our board of directors, board of governors. And then the faculty member can take sabbatical for starting a company, can combine it with a leave, 2 years of unpaid leave, and then build a company, take that 50 lakh rupee grant, and then build that company. So we are now trying to convert more and more faculty members into entrepreneurs. The reason why we are doing it is when faculty members do that, the PhD students will join hands. Otherwise, just telling PhD students you become entrepreneurs and all of that is not going to take them anywhere. When faculty members start doing it, the PhD students also will go in that direction, and that is how the deep tech innovation will thrive. We in fact have a separate incubator for PhDs, and this PhD here stands for Platform for Harnessing Deep Technologies. So somebody with a deep tech kind of an idea, we have a separate incubator for them, and there we again fund them fellowship and all of that, because we are expecting our PhDs to become entrepreneurs, but at that stage in life, they have other family commitments. So what we do is we give them a scholarship, a kind of a stipend on a monthly basis, and then they can use that stipend and convert their PhD problem into a startup idea. So this is again, so these are all the ways we are trying to now drive the deep tech innovation in our campuses. The fourth thing is the connections with the strategic agencies. About 3.5 years ago, I once met with the secretary or chairman of DRDO, and we started a program called Joint Advanced Technology Center at IIT Delhi. Under that, we said, DRDO can give their problems to us, and our faculty will work on it. And today I am happy that after 3.5 years, we have something like 265 crore worth projects at IIT Delhi, which are all funded by DRDO. And there are about 80 faculty members at IIT Delhi, about 150 PhD students who are directly working on the DRDO problems, and they're all funded by them. And similarly, the ISRO also, we have started a ISRO cell, and ISRO is also funding a lot of problems, a lot of projects here. And when they fund a project, they also give the problem, and along with that, the money. Whereas if you go to DST kind of agencies, DST doesn't give you a project. You go to the DST with a project, DST only gives funding. So we are more and more looking at agencies which give funds, but also the problems. So the both coming from one place would mean that relevance will happen, because nobody will put their money if that research is not relevant to them. So that is one way we are again trying to bring the relevance. So now more and more projects at IIT Delhi now are getting identified by either industry interactions, society interactions, or from strategic agencies. That is one major shift that we have brought about at IIT Delhi. And for example, about 5 years ago, IIT Delhi was doing research to the tune of about 70 to 80 crores per year. It was below 100 crores kind of a research per year. But today we are now touching anywhere up to, we are 400 to 500 crores per year. So there is a 4 times increase in our research budgets, because of the reasons of better connections with all of these agencies. I think that is something that needs to happen on our campuses more. And usually when you talk about research, I call them the 5 T's. These are the 5 technology platforms which are going to impact almost every aspect of our life. What are these 5 technology platforms? I call them IT, BT, NT, CT, and QT. So these are the 5 technology platforms. The information technology, we all know India is a global player on the information technology scene. If you look at the Saudi Arabia, the crude oil exports were $133.6 billion in 2019. Indian IT exports matched the Saudi Arabia's crude oil exports, and whereas IT is all renewable, there is nothing that will diminish if you export the IT, whereas the crude oil, it's a fossil fuel and it won't last forever. So I think India has that brain power, which has helped it to capture the information technology market. Even the biotechnology, we know now that there is a strong biotechnology industry that exists in our country. We have seen the vaccine development. We have seen that we are the vaccine manufacturers. But for a very long time now India has been a global player on the biotechnology front, and that is also the reason why we were able to fight the COVID more effectively than many other developed kind of countries. And the nanotechnology is the third T that has been there for almost like 2 decades now. Starting from 2000 onwards, the nanotechnology has become very important for all sciences and for all new technologies. And here again, India is ranked 3rd in the world for knowledge generation. So we are writing lots of good papers in the nanotechnology space. But I think converting that knowledge to wealth is where the innovation needs to happen. But I can see at least a dozen companies now, startups in this space, which are doing very well. They have been able to put out their products into the market, and some of them are beginning to do pretty well on that front. The 4th T is the cognitive technology, which is where the AI, ML kind of areas come in. And here again, India is doing quality research. In terms of numbers, we don't match up to anything, any good other developed nations. But in terms of quality, we are ranked 5th, because the papers that are written from India in terms of citations, we are ranked 5th in the world right now for cognitive technology. So while quality is there, but we need to build a base. We don't have enough people working in the AI, ML areas. But I'm also happy to see that almost every good institution in the country, whether it is in the public sector or private sector space, has started AI, ML programs at the postgraduate and PhD and undergraduate level. I think sooner or later India will build that scale, provide that scale for manpower required for taking these technologies to the next level. So here we need to build a scale. Finally, the quantum technologies. India has a very strong tradition of basic research. I think we need to capitalize on that and then get into this area in a major way. The future computational requirements will all be met by the quantum computers, as everyone is saying, and even the cryptography and quantum communications. All of these are areas where the quantum is going to play a very major role. And India now needs to put its act together and then start to ramp up this activity. But when it comes to these 5 technology platforms, the first 2 we are doing pretty well. We can do even better. The third, we need to focus more on translation of knowledge into wealth. The fifth and sixth, the fourth and fifth, here is where we need to, start to ramp up our activities and build scale. And that is something that is again going to become very important. And on nanotechnology, which is my area of research, I will tell you, how I have been able to, at least do that innovation part of it, in the nanotechnology space. I think nanotechnology comes in multiple dimensions: the nano materials, nano electronics, nano biotechnology, the three aspects of nanotechnology. So there is nano materials, nanotechnology, nano electronics. So these are the three domains in which you can distribute the nanotechnology research. And India is, we have built excellent facilities, and a lot of good research is happening in all of these kinds of domains. And when I look at my research, for example, if how do you pick up a problem? How did I pick up my problem? For example, if you look at humans today, or humans for generations, we have basically been, we are considered intelligent because we gather information through these five senses: the sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. There is, of course, the sixth sense also, which many people don't usually study, but that is called proprioception, which is a sense of location. Your the what the GPS does, for example, is what the brain does. It gives you the sense of location, where you are, and all of that, and it's like the GPS functionality. So when you look at humans and compare it with electronics today, what you find in mobile phones and all that, these three senses, or even these four senses, because the GPS capability, mobile phone knows where it is, and mobile phone has a good sense of its location and all of that. So out of the six senses, the four are already there in your electronics. So they are already pretty well developed in a way, because you can do a lot of interesting things with these technologies which are present in a mobile phone. But the two senses which humans have, which are missing in any electronic system, are the smell sensors and the taste sensors. So these are the two things that are missing. So I started to, around 2004, 2005 time frame. We started to see, can we develop some of these sensors and then use them in the mobile phones for a variety of applications. So we started to look at some of these. There are many problems where you can actually spend your time, whether it is agriculture or healthcare or security or energy or water. In all of these, you can actually spend time. You need to also ensure that your technologies become affordable, because if you look at the World Bank data, you actually will be surprised to know that 80% of humanity in the world lives on less than $10 a day. All the money they make in a month is about $300. That is the average money 80% of humanity actually makes. So whatever technologies you develop, you need to keep in mind this bottom of pyramid. You need to ensure that the technologies that you develop, can have applications to these people as well, and which can make an impact in their lives and improve their quality of life. So therefore, that is very important. So when I looked at my career profile, since I came back to India in '98, one of the first problems I picked up, a large kind of a project, was to develop a cardiac diagnostic system. How did I find that problem? I did not find it from library. I found it by interactions with the medical doctors. So that is when through our colleagues at IIT Bombay, Professor Soumya Mukherjee and many others. So we started to talk to doctors and see whether we could develop a cardiac diagnostic system, a kind of a screening technology for cardiac patients. Now, one of the ways we started to look at it is, the heart attacks. Can you predict heart attacks? If somebody is having a chest pain, can I rule out using a 100 rupee test whether the chest pain is because of a heart problem or whether it is because of any other problem? Because chest pain can come because of any other problem. So we said, can you rule out the heart problem in someone who is having a chest pain? Can we do those tests at home itself? That was the very first project that we have taken up. And when we started working on it, this is a myocardial infarction. We call it infarction sensor, iSense we call it. And so then we did a top-down design. We first said, what should the chip consist of? It is like your blood glucose testing. You have a cartridge, a small strip, and then you have a small instrument. You put a drop of blood onto this strip, and then you put it into this instrument. The instrument will tell you, whether you have it looks for these markers. These markers are typically troponin, myoglobin kind of markers, which are very selective to the cardiac proteins, like the troponin, myoglobin are the cardiac proteins, which are very known to be selective to the myocardial infarction, which can trigger a heart attack. So you are now trying to detect these cardiac proteins in very low concentrations. So for that, we wanted to develop the technology, a small strip that will contain the blood filters and take the plasma and the sensors for the cardiac proteins, and then a small tabletop instrument where it will display, it will tell you whether your cardiac protein concentrations are high or low, and using that you should be able to diagnose whether somebody is going to have a heart attack or not. And then we started working on the platform. In my group, we started working on a cantilever-based platform. We have published lots of papers on this. On the platform, we could write many papers, and we protected this IP through various patents and all that. We developed the entire electronics for that. And again, we hold IP for the electronic systems for this. And with the help of our design department, we were able to build the complete, the casing for that. We actually have this now as a product. And that is when we transferred this technology to a company we incubated at IIT Bombay called NanoSniff Technologies Private Limited. So we transferred the technology to them. And so once we developed the platform, then we started to see where else can we use the platform. And we started looking at the explosive detection. And for this, again, we use the same platform, but now the coatings are different. So we put a coating here. These coatings bind to vapors of explosive. And when they bind to the vapors of explosive, then the surface stress is what we detect electrically using a piezoresistive kind of a thing. So we worked with the chemists, we worked with biologists. Again, most of these projects, because we are looking at a complete prototype, we could not have developed with one single department's expertise. In most of these projects, there were at least 5 different departments, or faculty and students from 5 different departments were involved, because our ultimate goal was to develop a complete prototype, a product. And while in the process, you have lots of publications and patents. So that is how we actually visualize the whole project from the beginning, from a top-down kind of a design. And then we developed an electronic nose platform for that, and we developed this XNIF kind of a thing. And finally, after quite a bit of an effort, we were able to develop a electronic sniffing device, and that is based on a micro electromechanical system. I will not get into these technical details because we have published all of this work, and you can find these papers on my webpage. And so then we actually launched this product a few months ago, and this is called the Nano Sniffer. If you search on Google with the name Nano Sniffer, this is the explosive trace detector, and this is now available commercially all over the world. And this is a completely disruptive technology. And why is it disruptive? Because the cost of this entire product, which is in the market today, is 1/5 the cost of whatever is available, because it uses a totally different technology. And the technology is a disruptive one, because most of the explosive detectors use spectroscopy principles, or they use a chemical binding principle, but we have none of that. We have a physics-based principle where we actually collect vapors of explosive and we explode them. We deflagrate them. Technically, that is what it is known as. So when we explode these 20 nanograms of explosive materials and they generate an energy, that energy is what we sense using a temperature sensor. So we do pattern recognition there for different explosives. It can, because you are detecting the basic property of explosive, which is explosion at the nanoscale, you can detect almost all the explosives now. It doesn't need to be inorganic, organic, or anything, because most of the explosive detectors in the market are specific to the different types of explosive. But our system works across the board because it is actually exploding the material at the nanoscale and detecting the energy released out of it. And so that took us almost 10 years. So therefore, you need patience. If you want to develop products, it's not going to happen, in 2 years or 3 years time frame. You from the idea to the product. When this product is available on GEM now, the government e-marketplace. So from idea to the GEM portal, it will take you, full 8 to 10 years of time. That is what it took us for this. And in between, the startup played a very major role, because as academicians, we develop a proof of concept, show a proof of concept, but taking it to the product, I think, needs to be done by hand holding with a startup kind of a company, and the startup needs to generate its own resources. So that is a struggle that all startups go through. But fortunately, today there are multiple schemes available for doing all of that. And in fact, this product was launched by the previous education minister, Nishank Pokhriyal ji, and he actually launched this product. And Nano Sniffer can detect explosives in 10 seconds. And so this is now the world's first micro sensor based explosive trace detector. Now every airport finally should have it, and many airports are already purchasing it, and we are getting a lot of export orders. And this now NanoSniff is taking it forward, and this should become a major product from India in near future, because this is completely disruptive in its approach and technology. Now, having done that, we started focusing more on sensor nodes. Our idea is to miniaturize everything. That's a good part of electronics, and it can replace a sniffer dog at the end of the day. So now, can we have airports networked with these sensors? That is the goal. And for that, we started to see, airports, buses, trains, can we have protect these places with the sensor networks for explosive detection? And then, but the biggest challenge here again was, if you are putting it in buses and trains, how are you going to power them? And you cannot modify the bus body and all that, which will be a major deployment challenge. So we wanted sensors which you just go and stick them under the seats or where the bags are kept, and they generate their own power, and they keep looking for what is present inside the bag by just smelling. That's like a sniffer dog. So look at each of these sensors as a sniffer dog, which are working inside a bus or a train or any other place. So for that, to generate power from vibrations in the buses and trains, we started a program for piezoelectrics. So we did a lot of interesting work on the piezoelectrics jointly with Applied Materials Corporation and industry. And we wrote lots of good papers, high impact factor journals. Lead-free piezoelectrics is what we developed. So a lot of research also happens. Very often people say that if I am developing a product, what about my research? Can I publish papers? I have written, close to 500 papers now. It has happened because on the platform that you are working, if your technology requires deep science, papers will automatically come. Out of those papers, even the patents will also come. So therefore, developing products doesn't mean that you don't do basic research or you don't do research at all. You have to do very high quality research, but all of that research needs to be focused eventually to develop a prototype. If you keep your target as a prototype, all the research comes together, and then you will reach the target of developing a prototype. And if your target is to just publish papers, then if you write 10 papers, they will be in 10 different journals on 10 different topics. Nothing will come out of it. Therefore, keeping the prototype as a ultimate goal, as the final end point, is what will bring the multidisciplinarity will automatically come. To develop a complete explosive detector product, you cannot work it with one discipline. You have to have people from different disciplines adding to that entire product development. Or even for the cardiac thing, as I said, minimum 5 departments involved in some of these. And but final goal therefore was not publications or patents. We always saw them as byproducts, but then the final goal is to develop the prototype and take it to the society. It also made the problem very interesting. For example, when we wanted to develop the cardiac diagnostic chip, we wanted the price point to be 100 rupees. Now, when you put a price point of 100 rupees, even the material selection for your platform becomes very critical. Whereas in the literature, people use materials like gold and silicon and all of them, but for a 100 rupee test, You cannot have gold, for the contacting purposes. You cannot even use silicon because, silicon for disposable applications becomes very expensive. That led us, once we fixed the price point, that led us to look at new materials. We started focusing on polymers. We started focusing on very low cost fabrication technologies, which are like the benchtop nanotechnology and simple spin coating kind of technologies. So a lot of innovation came into the picture just because we set the price point as 100 rupees kind of a thing. So that sometimes makes your research much more interesting, much more challenging. And you can, if everybody is writing papers with silicon, suddenly you write papers with polymers. You can also write good papers in good journals. So therefore, I think keeping that end point in mind is often very important for all of these. And of late, I have been working on agricultural applications for the past 5 years. This has been my area of research. Here again, I started the problem just by observation in the society. Government has been talking about the soil health cards. Now, all farmers have received now soil health cards. If you look at the soil health card, you are expected to measure now in the form all of these parameters. Now, where will a poor farmer in a remote village, how will that farmer be able to measure these parameters and fill up all of these soil health cards? They have to use the agricultural labs, but these agricultural labs are not present everywhere. It just doesn't work all that easily. We said, can we develop a briefcase kind of a test? That briefcase will contain all the technologies required to measure or fill up the soil health card parameters, and a 10 standard person in a village should be able to do these tests. And then we'll have 2 or 3 villages covered, carries this briefcase, does all these measurements in the form, and then enters all these parameters and maintains the soil health card for that particular village. But for that now, what are the technologies you require? What will be the cost points, and how do you use the user interface so that the 10 standard village entrepreneur will be able to cover some of those villages? So you need to think about the business models for all of that. The MBA graduates can actually work with you hand in hand while developing some of these solutions. So then we actually, between IIT Delhi and IIT Bombay, we propose 4 different prototypes which can help fill up that soil health card. And we started working on it for the past almost like 4 years now. Now we have multiple technologies. All these we started a company about 1.5 years ago called Soil Sense Technologies. My PhD students who have been working on it now run this company, Soil Sense. Now this company is already selling products and they're all there in the market now. We are working with multiple farms, and we can do a lot of these micro and macro nutrient measurements using these very simple kind of soil health stations. And so this company now has been testing it in the field for different crops, and a lot of work is actually happening in that direction. They are already funded by various agencies. And so this is the point. I mean, the point is if you put the end goal as a prototype or a product for a particular purpose, multidisciplinarity will automatically come into picture. Your research becomes more interesting, more exciting, because now you have to look for materials and platforms to meet those price points. So that is what I have been doing, and it has been quite an interesting thing. The 2 companies which we founded, the NanoSniff is doing pretty well now. They have products in the market, for whatever we developed in the lab. Soil Sense also is doing very well. They are already now in the market now. While the first product took us about 10 years, the Soil Sense products, in about 5 years of time, we were able to bring things from lab to the land, and that was possible, because of collaborations with multiple industries and all that. So basically the top-down product-oriented approach is the key. We need to focus on that. On the platform development, you can do a lot of good basic science, and you can write great papers there. Therefore, doing research in this space doesn't mean you need to compromise on your research quality. You need to protect IP as early as possible. Now, this is a point which is very important, because why do you file an IP? Why do you need to file a patent? The patent you file because if you don't file, if I am developing a product, what is my ultimate goal? My ultimate goal is to take it to the market. Now, if I don't own the IP for that particular technology, I can never start a company. If I start a company, no investor will even invest in my company because they will say, you don't even own your IP. What if tomorrow somebody copies your technology? I invest in your company. Your technology is freely available to anybody who wants to use it, not protected by any IP. Nobody will fund you. Therefore, if your idea is to develop a product, and if you start a company eventually, you have to protect IP as much as possible. Without that, there is no company, there is no investment, nothing will happen. But why? But where do you file the patent? Do I file an Indian patent or do I file a US patent? Now, for agricultural products, what is my market? My market is India because 50% of Indians are into the agricultural space. Now, for agricultural products, if I want to launch my product in India, for me, Indian patent is good enough. I don't need to file any other patent because you can build $1 billion company by just making those technologies available for Indians. Now, for explosive detection, what is my market? So therefore, Indian patent there will work. The day I file an Indian patent, nobody else anywhere in the world can file another patent on the same idea because India is a signatory to the World Trade, the WIPO. So therefore, India being a signatory of the WIPO, whatever patents you file in India are protected the worldwide. Nobody else can file a patent. But if somebody in China, for example, copies my technology, because I have not protected it in China, copies my technology, sells it in countries other than India, then India I am protected, but I am not protected in the US. So somebody in China can copy my technology, sell it in the US, I can't stop that. So now if I want to stop it, I have to file that patent in China. I also have to file that patent in US. Therefore, once you file a patent in India, it is covered the worldwide. Nobody else can file a patent. But your idea can be copied by somebody and marketed somewhere without any worries because your IP is only protected in India. So that possibility is there. Therefore, how many countries you file your patent depends on where all you are going to market your product. For the explosive detection, we filed patents in US. We have a patent granted in the US. We have a patent granted in the entire Europe. Therefore, our explosive detector product cannot be copied, cannot be sold without our permission in the US, in Europe, and in India. But in Israel, somebody can do that. If I want to stop it, I have to file the Israeli patent. I have to file in any country where I want to go with my technology. I will have to do that. So therefore, that is a call as entrepreneurs we need to take. It costs money to file so many patents in so many countries. But depending on which country is of interest for you, eventually for your product, I think in those countries, you need to protect your patents. And for agriculture, we have only filed Indian patents because we are only looking at India as our market right now. At some stage, we will file South African patents. And because we also now plan to take these technologies to African countries. And there we might want to do that. But another important thing is, your technologies need to have certain depth, certain barrier for entry. If you are doing some jugaad kind of a technology, however many patents you might file, somebody will copy the technology and you won't be able to enforce it. So therefore, but nano sniffer, the explosive detection technology, for anybody to develop it, I can tell you any part of the world, depending on whether it is Stanford or MIT, any place, it will take them the same amount of time. It will take them at least 5 years of time to develop the technology and mature it to the level that we have brought it now. And by that time, you would go to the next generation of technology. So therefore, they have a lot of catch up to do. So we need to get into areas where there is a barrier for entry. And there, the patents will become important, but not so critical. And even if I don't file a patent in Africa, I am not worried because nobody will be able to copy it, and then be able to go ahead of us because there is a lot of there are a lot of innovation, a lot of technology, a lot of ideas which have gone into developing that product. So in academic institutions such as ours, we need to work in areas where there is a barrier for entry. And if somebody can so easily copy, however many number of patents you may have, you won't be able to enforce them. So I would believe in this deep tech innovation, in our academic institutions, primarily from that point of view. And it's also important that, just to be in a hurry to start a company is never a good idea. You need to mature your technology in academic environment, and you build almost all your prototypes in your institution. And when you start a company, within 6 months time, you should be able to sell it. And otherwise, you don't have a premature kind of a technology and you start a company. And now, once you start a company, you cannot use DST money or your project money or anything, to run your company. You have to generate funds from various sources, and generating funds in startups or in industries is more difficult than generating funds in an academic place. In academia, you can go to DST and get funding and run it as a project. So therefore, I think we should not be in a hurry to start companies. We should try to mature these technologies as much as possible in our institutions. And then, like I said, for the first company, NanoSniff, we made that mistake. We started that company too early. It took us, to survive as a company. It was a lot of struggle. But finally, they have been able to launch the product and now able to survive. But the soil sense, we learned from that mistake. Soil sense, the day the company was formed, within 6 months they were able to make revenues. They were able to sell their systems, and that way the company was able to succeed, in a far shorter kind of a time frame, and it was less of a struggle. So these are learnings that you go through, which will be useful. And because there are a lot of government sources available for companies initially, and you don't have to go after VCs and private investors too early, because if you at a very early stage, if you go to a private investor, you dilute equity very significantly. After that, the founders may not even have any enthusiasm to pursue anymore, because the guy who has put in 1 crore rupees would have taken away half of your company. So therefore, it's good to work with government sources. There are multiple government channels available now for startup funding. We should exhaust all of those options, and only finally, once the company valuations become higher and once you have products in the market, that is when, if you require, you can seek private investments. And I also believe that professors and students alone cannot build company. The team is important. Both my companies have professionals now, have serial entrepreneurs, and we have always tied up with the right set of people for who brought those skills which we don't have as professors, and that was very important. And so the team is very important. And then we also, I also see many people fighting for equity. Once you start a company, the fights will start. That this person has contributed less, this person has contributed more. Why should my equity be less than somebody's equity? I think those issues will start. Therefore, we all must be very careful very early on. However good we may be as friends, we have co-founded a company. It's very important to put all of that in proper place, proper documentation, so that in the future, if somebody leaves a company, how much of equity they will take it away, how much of equity will remain. All of these things need to be thought out at the beginning itself. Otherwise, I see now a lot of companies failing because of co-founders not able to work with each other. And we need to involve students in this enterprise, because they are our future, they are our next generation. All my companies are run by my PhD students, and I don't even now get involved in the day-to-day kind of operations. And because they now, that culture needs to come into our institutions, with the top-down design, developing a prototype, putting everything together to develop a product, and then students running these companies and taking them forward. I think that culture needs to happen. There are enough problems for us to work on. Everything, keep saying that all the world's problems are in India. If you want to identify a problem, you don't have to go to an American journal and find that. You just look around you, you find a problem around you. And each of these problems, you can spend your lifetime in finding a solution, because they all require deep technology. The agricultural problem you see in India, it requires such a deep science and such a deep technology that, it's not going to be easy to develop those solutions. So therefore, there are enough problems around us. And if you find the right set of problems, you can actually develop a lot of solutions to them. I always say that, that at least to me, having been in this innovation kind of a thing for almost close to 2 decades now, that these 3 P's are important. The passion, you need to be passionate. Nothing can be done by a 9 to 5 kind of a job. When somebody says that, I'm working very hard, but if you are working 10 to 5, that I don't consider as hard enough. That is your normal job. I think people who achieve some of these put in at least on an average 13 to 14 hours per day. I think, when they are, even when they are not working, they are only thinking about some of these problems. That is when great things will happen. So I think passion is very important. You need to have patience. Nothing is going to happen overnight. If I start a project today, a concept today, by the time I get it into the market, you are talking of, even with my experience now, nothing less than 5 to 7 years. I think for that product to mature and go on to the into the hands of the stakeholders, it will be at least 5 to 7 years. So you need to have that patience. I mean, in something which is so simple to do, somebody would have already done that. And even if you do that, somebody will copy it. So therefore, I think getting into areas where there is no barrier for entry is not going to take us anywhere. In our institutions, we need to work on the deep tech. We need to get into areas where there is a barrier for entry. And perseverance is very important, because you will have 100 reasons to give up. In this country, you can give excuse for not doing anything. I mean, for everything, there is an excuse why you could not do that. I think if you start giving excuses, you can wind up the company within the first year itself. So I think the passion, patience, and perseverance are very, very important if you want to succeed as an entrepreneur, and nothing else can replace that. I will stop here. I think I have taken already more time than what is given. Thanks a lot.